So, good morning. Yeah, my name is Rebecca Lait. I'm a second year PhD student with Fix Our Food at the University of York, which is part of the sort of wider UKRI Transforming UK Food Systems programme, for those that might be aware of it. And my PhD research is looking at, as you can see, investigating the role of power dynamics in the UK meat and livestock system. And I'm specifically focusing on how these power dynamics can contribute to the shaping of perceptions, controversies, narratives surrounding meat and livestock reduction strategies. Sometimes when I talk about this, people think I'm saying meat and livestock production. So just to be clear from the outset, I'm looking all about reduction. Yeah, so I just thought I would start by giving a bit of an overview of why I'm interested in looking at the meat and livestock system. So to give a little bit of background, my undergrad and master's were in theoretical physics, and while I really loved to study this, the more I learned about the climate crisis and antibiotic resistance and public health issues, the more I wanted to try and apply my physics knowledge to trying to find some of the solutions and causes to the climate crisis and a range of these issues. However, the more I sort of delved into the research on the climate crisis and a range of these things, the more I actually found that a lot of the solutions and certainly some of the causes are sort of already quite well established in the literature. And it certainly turns out that the UK meat and livestock system, certainly within the global meat and livestock system, but inclusive of the UK, has quite a considerable role in this. So yes, just starting with land use alone, if we're looking at climate change, this map here is adapted from the National Food Strategy, if any of you have seen that before or are aware of it. And it essentially shows that an area of land larger than the UK is currently used just to produce meat and livestock products that are consumed in the UK, or which we produce but just export. If we then look globally as well, we actually find that around half of all habitable land on the planet is used for food production. And of that half of all habitable land, over 3/4, around 77% of it, is used just for meat and livestock production. Despite this quite significant land use, globally, meat and livestock actually only contributes around 37% of protein and only 18% of calories. So we can see that it's actually quite an inefficient way to use our land. Sometimes when we talk about land use, something that's brought up is that not all land that's used for agriculture, certainly animal agriculture currently, is suitable for crop production. But actually what we find is if everyone, for example, were to go plant-based, we could actually free up around 75% of all land used for agriculture at the moment. And that's equivalent to North America plus Brazil combined. That's just what we could free up by eliminating animal products. Now, I'm not necessarily suggesting we do that, but I think it shows the fantastic potential that meat and livestock reduction strategies could have. Also, if we sort of look at the wider sort of impact of the meat and livestock system, I think it's so important to not just look at climate change and greenhouse gas emissions, and certainly not even just land use, but also deforestation, animal welfare issues, public health issues related to zoonotic disease risk or antibiotic resistance. And certainly I hope that my work in power dynamics can address some of these wider ranging issues too. So now sort of having very briefly covered some of the environmental impacts of the meat and livestock system and some of the wider impacts too, I was sort of quite shocked to learn that despite this really quite established understanding in the literature of these impacts, this wasn't being discussed very much. Certainly meat and livestock reduction wasn't being discussed very much. And in fact, when I brought it up, it was almost quite controversial to do so and to suggest these sorts of strategies. I think having been introduced to research through physics, I wasn't used to the idea that individuals' agendas or aims could sort of impact how research conclusions were disseminated, certainly to such an extent that those research conclusions, despite being so clear, can almost seem hidden away, both in sort of academic discussions, but certainly in decision-making proceedings too. I think I was especially confused because certainly in the academic community, we all seem to be in agreement that the food system is broken and that we need to transform it. And so I wasn't quite sure why we were all so willing to discuss such a fantastic range of ways to do that, except for meat and livestock reduction strategies. And so this is why I really wanted to study power dynamics. I wanted to sort of take a step back and say, what are all of these barriers to transformation? Why is it so controversial despite its fantastic potential? And how are the power dynamics really shaping how successful certain strategies are? And how do those power dynamics really shape how sort of acceptable they are, or the apparent feasibility or difficulty of them? So as I sort of then started to delve into the literature on power and power dynamics a bit more, unfortunately it was quickly confirmed to me that power dynamics really have massive capabilities in shaping agendas and really sort of essentially undermining effective transformation at times. And there is some existing research that shows that, even recent decision-making proceedings have sort of been overly influenced or overly shaped by influential participants. And this does certainly include some food system summits recently too. So I think that actually the presence of these ongoing power imbalances in the food system highlights that despite this sort of general understanding we all have that power can shape systems and things like that, more work needs to be done to actually address them and to actually try and alleviate some of the barriers that it's creating. And I really hope that that's where my work can come in a little bit. I think as well what I have been finding is that despite some quite well-established theories of power in the literature, they're not sort of extensively or specifically being applied to food systems thinking. So I'm really keen on trying to bring these two areas together. And certainly taking a step back as well, from what I've seen so far, a lot of the discussions around power tend to focus on policy and governance. And while this is, of course, central to looking at power dynamics, I think it's key to really take a step back and recognise all of the interconnected actors and actions that the whole food system makes and creates if we really want to understand where the power lies in the system. So certainly when we're looking at power, there are lots of different ways to look at it. Some people see it as power in actors themselves or the actions that they make, and one actor can have power over another by something that they do. Others see power within sort of the structures of a society, and that can enable or disable actors to be able to do certain things. Again, others see power as sort of diffuse throughout a society. And I'm very open to continually developing how I see power and how it's relevant to my work. But at the moment, what seems to be most relevant is looking at power in resources, and certainly how those resources can create dependencies between actors or systems. When I say resources as well, I certainly mean the physical things like the trade of food or even the exchange of money, but also those intangible things like a certain actor having access to contacts or access to opportunities, and how that can really shape the power dynamics at play as well. I think due to the very nature of power, it really necessitates recognising the interconnected nature of all actors. Existing research often focuses on power dynamics, but looks at just sort of individual actors in silo. But I think it really necessitates sort of taking a step back and looking at the ripple effects that each actor's decisions or actions has on the rest of the system, and how that either purposefully or indirectly might affect everybody else. So based on all of that, the view that I'll be taking is a systems view when I'm looking at power. So I'll sort of zoom out and try to look at all actors simultaneously. Because of this siloed view, often in some existing research, it sort of means that, for example, if you speak to one type of actor, they might say that the power is actually with somebody else. And because that actor is maybe outside the scope of the study, that person wasn't able to be interviewed, for example. But then when another piece of research goes and looks at somebody else in the study, in the system, they might say, oh, actually, the power is with somebody else, again, external to the study. So I think sort of these vicious cycles of passing on the barriers or the responsibilities seem to arise. And I think it's really key to try and find where we can intercept these vicious cycles. I'm also, not to sound too cynical, but I'm also really interested in whether these vicious cycles that get created are created because actors genuinely have barriers to transformation, or whether it's sort of a strategic move just to be able to pass on the responsibility. So, as a key output for my work, something I'm really interested in developing is an initial mapping that I've started that will really aim to map out the power relationships, the dependencies, the flow of resources through the UK meat and livestock system. And I'm currently using Kumu to do this, if any of you may be aware of it, and I'm using both primary and secondary data to sort of populate that. As I mentioned a moment ago, these vicious cycles, certainly when we're looking at power dynamics and responsibility for change, really seem to arise. So I hope that my map can, well, certainly the analysis from the map can help sort of identify some of these key leverage points on where we can intercept these vicious cycles and really hopefully accelerate some transformation. So just to finish off, I thought I would just give a sort of overview of my data collection methods. So it will be in 3 main stages. The first is focus groups with academics. The second is interviews with a range of stakeholders. And the third is a survey. So firstly, with the focus groups with academics, what I hope to do is, certainly coming at this from a physics perspective, I haven't developed too much or too broad of a sort of bank of knowledge on food systems and power just yet. So I'm really interested in learning more, or as much as I can, from academics that are really focusing their research on the meat and livestock system. I'll also be sort of working with them to further develop my map, and hopefully also that will help them to sort of raise who they think is important for me to interview. So then moving on to the interviews, hopefully everyone that I'll be interviewing will be really relevant and will have been identified from these academics. In the interviews, I'll be using snowball sampling. So with each participant, I'll then be asking them who they think will be important for me to interview based on their understanding of power and certainly the meat and livestock system. And to really try and ensure true data saturation and also try and uncover sort of their views on power as well, I'll also be asking them in the interviews who they think would disagree with them, and hopefully I'll try and interview them as well to really get a broad understanding of sort of some of the tensions at play within the meat and livestock system, and certainly within the power dynamics too. And then to finish off, the survey that I'll be conducting will be sent out to hopefully a much wider number of people that work within the meat and livestock system to try and understand essentially how representative the opinions and perspectives expressed in the interviews were, but on a wider scale. Thank you.